The ranch had fallen into a silence that most people would find unbearable, but Clara Merrick had grown accustomed to it. Her husband's death had carved a hole so deep that sound seemed to vanish inside it. Even the creak of the windmill, the lowing of cattle, and the chatter of the ranch hands seemed muffled when she walked the grounds. She wore black still, not out of tradition, but because it fit the way her spirit felt, covered, shrouded, unyielding. 6 months had passed since she buried John Merrick, and every day since had been a battle between her pride and her grief. Everyone expected her to crumble, to sell the land and take her children back east, but Clara was stubborn. The Merrick Ranch was hers now, and no whispering neighbor or opportunistic suitor would push her from it. The morning had been long and hot, and Clara was surveying the fence line when she noticed the shadow first. It was massive, stretching across the dirt like a tree that had uprooted itself. She turned sharply, her hand instinctively gripping the edge of her shawl as though it might shield her from whatever loomed. He was a giant of a man, broad in the shoulders, towering over anyone she had ever seen. His clothes were ragged, boots torn, his hair unkempt and falling into his face. What struck her most were his eyes, tired, sunken, yet carrying something that felt almost childlike in its vulnerability. "Ma'am," the man said, voice deep and rough like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "I need work," Clara stiffened. Strangers appeared now and then, drawn by the wealth of the ranch or the rumor of a widow with land to spare. But there was something about this one that unsettled her differently. "We don't need beggars here," she replied coolly. "Keep walking," he didn't leave. Instead, he lowered his head as though ashamed to meet her glare, and spoke words that would freeze her in place for days afterward. "Let me stay and work for you. I'll even get you pregnant again if that's what it takes to prove myself." The audacity of it, the bluntness, sent a shock through her chest. Clara's cheeks burned hot, and her voice rose sharp as a whip. "What did you just say?" The giant swallowed hard, his jaw tight, his hands curling at his sides. "I meant—" He hesitated, the words stumbling over themselves. "I meant I'll give everything I've got, body and soul, to belong here. If that means giving you more family, more children to carry your name, then so be it." "I didn't mean no insult." Clara stared at him, searching for malice in his tone, but all she found was desperation. Not the kind of desperation that comes from hunger alone, though hunger was plain in his hollow cheeks, but the deeper kind, the desperation of someone who had been denied a place in the world too long. She should have ordered him off her land immediately. Any respectable woman would have. But instead she said coldly, "This ranch doesn't keep fools. If you think you're worth something, prove it. By sunup tomorrow." That night she lay awake, furious with herself for not sending him away. His words echoed in her head, almost indecent, yet laced with a sincerity that disarmed her. She told herself she would toss him out at dawn if he proved lazy or unfit. Yet when she rose early and stepped outside, she found him already at the fence line, bare hands wrapped around the wood, pulling broken posts from the earth. His palms were bleeding, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat, but his face showed no complaint. He nodded once at her presence, then went on working. By noon, the ranch hands were muttering among themselves. The giant, Jonas, as he finally introduced himself, lifted hay bales that normally took 2 men to move. He worked silently, as though afraid speaking might cost him the place he was trying to carve for himself. When the others took breaks, he labored still. By the end of the day, the men were whispering about him as if he were half man, half ox. Clara tried to remain indifferent. She kept her tone sharp, her orders brief, and her distance firm. Yet every time she passed him, her eyes betrayed her. She noticed the way his back arched as he swung heavy loads onto his shoulder, the way his jaw clenched with discipline rather than anger, and most of all, the way his gaze softened when her children approached him. Anna, no more than 6, was the first to wander close. Clara nearly called her back, but before she could, Jonas knelt down, lowering his massive frame until his face was level with the little girl's. Anna giggled, reaching up to touch the beard that shadowed his chin. He smiled then, just a small curve of his lips, but it transformed him. Samuel, older and more cautious, tested him next, daring Jonas to lift him high. Without effort, Jonas swept the boy up onto his shoulders, making him laugh so loud that Clara felt a lump form in her throat. Her children hadn't laughed like that in months. That evening, Clara found herself standing in the kitchen window, watching Jonas sit by the barn, patching a broken harness by firelight. His hands were clumsy but persistent, his brows drawn in concentration. She told herself he was just another worker, nothing more, yet something inside her shifted. Days bled into weeks. Jonas never asked for pay, only food and shelter, and he never spoke more than a few words unless spoken to. Still, his presence grew unavoidable. He was everywhere, fixing roofs, calming spooked horses, hauling water when the pump faltered. Clara began to notice the ranch seemed to breathe easier under his weight, as though the land itself had been waiting for his strength. But the words he'd spoken that first day lingered between them. Clara tried to bury them, but one night, when a storm tore across the sky and Jonas wrestled the barn doors against the wind, she couldn't hold it back. She stepped into the rain, lightning flashing across his scarred face, and demanded, "Why would you say that to me? About children?" Jonas stilled, his chest rising and falling with the strain of the storm. "Because I saw it in your eyes," he said quietly. "The same emptiness I carry. I thought if I could give you back what you lost, maybe I'd matter again. Maybe I could give you a reason to keep on." Clara's throat burned, her pride warring with the ache inside her. She wanted to call him a fool, to mock his simplicity. But no man had spoken to her with such unvarnished honesty since John. No man had offered himself not for wealth, not for land, but for the sheer need to belong. She turned away before he could see the tears that stung her eyes. For the first time in months, Clara Merrick's armor cracked, and in that crack, the seed of something dangerous, something tender, began to grow. Jonas became a fixture on the ranch, though he never claimed a place loudly. He was a shadow at first, a giant who appeared wherever work needed doing. Clara noticed the small things before she allowed herself to see the larger ones. A bucket that had been cracked for months, suddenly patched. A gate that always leaned awkwardly now stood straight and strong. Horses that once bucked and fought the harness calmed under his hand, as though sensing that his strength was not something to resist, but something that protected. He carried himself with the humility of a man who had once lost everything and knew better than to take what was not offered. That humility, strange in such a massive body, unsettled Clara more than arrogance ever could. Her children were the first to stop calling him Mr. Jonas and simply call him Jonas. Samuel trailed him like a shadow, asking questions about ropes and saddles, eager to learn. Jonas never snapped, never dismissed, always answered with a patience that surprised her. Anna climbed into his lap, as if he had been born for her to lean on. Clara kept her distance, afraid to trust what she saw, afraid that this strange gentleness might be only a disguise. Yet she could not deny the change that had come over her home. The laughter of her children returned. The ranch hands worked harder, inspired by the giant's tireless example. Even the land itself seemed steadier under his presence. But with the good came the weight of gossip. Word traveled fast in the valley. Neighbors saw Jonas's size and ragged clothes, saw Clara's children tugging at his hands, and whispers followed. A widow so wealthy had suitors already, men from respectable families, men with gold in their pockets and polished boots. When they visited, one evening when the moonlight silvered the fields, Clara walked to where Jonas was sitting alone, sharpening tools by the barn. She stood before him for a long moment before finally speaking. Her voice was soft, steady, but filled with more courage than she had ever managed since John's death. "Jonas, I'm carrying your child." The giant froze. His breath caught in his chest, his massive hands stilled on the blade. Slowly, as though disbelief weighed down every movement, he set the tool aside and rose to his knees in the dirt. Tears gathered in his eyes, raw and unhidden, streaking down his scarred face. He lowered his head to her stomach as if bowing to the very life within her, his great shoulders trembling. "Thank God," he whispered, the words breaking apart with emotion. "Thank God I belong somewhere again." Clara laid her hand on his head, her tears falling freely now. The woman who had thought herself broken, destined to raise her children alone, found herself standing in the arms of a man who had nothing left but love to give. And it was enough. More than enough. For the first time since the grave swallowed her husband, Clara Merrick's heart beat with something stronger than grief. It beat with hope. And in that moment, beneath the quiet stars and the endless prairie sky, the widow who had lost everything and the giant who believed he had nothing to give discovered the truth. Together, they had found everything they needed.